In the marble corridors of power where empires rise and fall with the turning of a single decision, there exists a truth so fundamental that it has shaped the destiny of nations and the fate of kings. This truth, whispered in the shadows of the Medici palaces and carved into the very foundations of political thought, speaks not of kindness or mercy, but of the relentless forge that transforms weakness into invincible strength. The year was 1513 when a disgraced diplomat, stripped of his position and exiled from the city he had served with unwavering devotion, sat in his modest farmhouse outside Florence. His hands, once accustomed to sealing treaties and drafting correspondence that could alter the course of kingdoms, now worked the soil and tended to humble chickens. Yet in this apparent fall from grace lay the seeds of immortal wisdom that would echo through the centuries. Niccolo Machiavelli understood what few men of his time dared acknowledge, that the world rewards not the virtuous but the strong, not the kind but the cunning, not the trusting but those who have learned to trust only in their own carefully cultivated power. In his exile, surrounded by the rustic simplicity of rural life, he began to codify the laws that separate those who shape destiny from those who merely endure it. These laws are not for the faint of heart. They demand nothing less than the complete dismantling of one's weaker self, that collection of fears, hesitations, and naive beliefs that society teaches us to cherish as virtues. For in this destruction lies the path to a strength so complete that no external force can touch it. The first revelation came to him as he observed the behavior of his neighbors during a particularly harsh winter. Those who hoarded their resources and maintained strict boundaries survived and thrived, while those who gave freely found themselves begging for scraps before spring arrived. Nature herself taught the lesson that generosity without discernment is not virtue but folly, and that true strength begins with the ruthless protection of one's own interests. The first law: never reveal your full hand. The merchant who displays all his gold invites robbery. The general who reveals his entire strategy ensures his defeat. The man who shows all his emotions becomes a puppet in the hands of those who would manipulate him. This first law cuts to the heart of human interaction itself. The understanding that information is power, and power shared carelessly is power lost. In the courts of Renaissance Italy, Machiavelli witnessed firsthand how the most successful princes were those who maintained an air of mystery about their true intentions. Cesare Borgia, for all his ruthlessness, succeeded not merely through violence but through his ability to keep friend and foe alike guessing about his next move. When adversaries cannot predict your actions, they cannot prepare effective countermeasures. When allies cannot take your support for granted, they value it more highly and work harder to retain it. The application of this law extends far beyond the realm of politics. In business, the negotiator who reveals his desperate need for a deal loses all leverage before discussions even begin. In personal relationships, the individual who lays bare every vulnerability provides weapons to those who might one day choose to use them. This is not advocating for dishonesty, but for strategic discretion, the difference between lying and simply choosing what truths to reveal and when. Consider the master craftsman who guards the secrets of his trade. He shares enough knowledge to demonstrate his expertise, but never so much that an apprentice might replace him. He builds loyalty through the gradual revelation of wisdom, creating bonds of dependence that strengthen his position while advancing his students' knowledge. This is the essence of the first law. Information is a resource to be invested wisely, not squandered carelessly. The weak reveal everything in hopes of gaining approval or sympathy. They mistake vulnerability for authenticity and wonder why their openness is met with exploitation rather than reciprocal honesty. The strong understand that mystery creates respect, that partial knowledge generates intrigue, and that the person who can never be fully known can never be fully controlled. The second law: master your emotions before they master you. The human heart, for all its capacity for love and inspiration, remains the most treacherous terrain any man must navigate. Emotions, like fire, can provide warmth and light when properly controlled, but will consume everything in their path when allowed to run wild. The weak man believes his feelings are sacred, that to suppress them is to deny his humanity. The strong man recognizes emotions as tools, powerful tools that must be wielded with precision rather than worshipped as gods. Machiavelli observed this principle in action during his diplomatic missions to France, where he watched seasoned negotiators remain perfectly composed while delivering news that would devastate their enemies, or announcing terms that would enrich their allies beyond measure. Their faces revealed nothing. Their voices carried no tremor of excitement or fear. They had learned to feel deeply while showing nothing. to process their emotions privately while presenting only the face that served their purposes. Anger, perhaps the most dangerous of emotions, transforms even the wisest man into a fool. The angry man speaks truths he should keep hidden, makes promises he cannot keep, and creates enemies from those who might have been allies. History is littered with the ruins of men who allowed their temper to dictate their actions. They confused passion with strength and learned too late that rage is the luxury of those who can afford to lose. Fear, anger's quieter cousin, paralyzes potential and blinds judgment. The fearful man sees threats where opportunities exist and builds walls where bridges would serve him better. Yet fear, when acknowledged and examined rather than blindly obeyed, becomes the foundation of wisdom. The truly strong do not eliminate fear. They analyze it, learn from its warnings, and then act despite its protestations. Love, perhaps the most complex emotion of all, has been the downfall of more powerful men than war and plague combined. Not love itself, which can inspire greatness and provide meaning to existence, but the desperate neediness that masquerades as love. The weak man in love becomes a slave to his beloved's moods and whims. The strong man loves deeply but maintains his independence, offering his affection as a gift rather than surrendering it as tribute. The cultivation of emotional mastery requires daily practice and unflinching self-examination. It demands the ability to pause between stimulus and response, to choose one's reactions rather than simply experiencing them. This does not create cold, heartless individuals. Quite the opposite. It creates people capable of accessing the full spectrum of human emotion while remaining masters of their own destiny. The third law: create value or become expendable in the unforgiving mathematics of survival. Those who cannot demonstrate their worth soon discover their worthlessness. This third law strikes at the heart of a comfortable delusion that pervades modern thinking: the belief that simply existing entitles one to respect, resources, and consideration. The harsh reality, unchanged since the dawn of civilization, is that value must be created, demonstrated, and continuously renewed. The Renaissance period taught this lesson with particular cruelty. Artists, scholars, and even princes found their fortunes tied directly to their ability to produce results that others valued. Lorenzo de' Medici surrounded himself not with the needy or the sentimental, but with those who could create beauty, generate wealth, or provide strategic advantage. When their usefulness ended, so did their welcome in his circle. Value creation takes many forms, but it always involves solving problems that others cannot or will not solve themselves. The physician creates value by healing ailments. The artist by inspiring emotions that transform the observer. The merchant by connecting those who have what others need. The soldier by providing security that enables others to pursue their own value creation. Each fills a role that society recognizes as essential, and in doing so secures their position within that society. The modern world offers unprecedented opportunities for value creation, yet it also enables unprecedented levels of self-deception about one's worth. Social media platforms allow individuals to mistake attention for achievement, confusing the ability to entertain with the capacity to contribute. The weak person seeks validation through likes and shares, building their identity on the shifting sands of public approval. A strong person focuses on developing skills and knowledge that solve real problems for real people, creating foundations that cannot be shaken by changing trends or fickle audiences. This law applies with equal force to personal relationships. A friend who provides only drama and demands constant attention soon finds himself isolated. The romantic partner who offers nothing but emotional neediness discovers that even the deepest love has its limits. Conversely, those who consistently bring joy, wisdom, support, or practical assistance to others find themselves surrounded by people eager to maintain the relationship. The creation of value requires honesty about one's current capabilities and a commitment to continuous improvement. It demands the humility to recognize gaps in one's knowledge or skills and the discipline to address those gaps through study and practice. Most importantly, it requires the ability to see beyond one's own needs and desires to understand what others truly value. The fourth law: control the narrative or others will control you. The story people tell about you becomes more powerful than the truth of who you are. This fourth law recognizes that in a world where perception shapes reality, the ability to influence how others interpret your actions and motivations becomes a form of power more subtle, but often more effective than wealth or physical strength. Those who fail to craft their own narrative find themselves at the mercy of others' interpretations, often bearing little resemblance to their true character or intentions. Machiavelli understood this principle from bitter personal experience. Despite his loyal service to the Florentine Republic, his association with Republican ideals made him suspect when the Medici returned to power. The narrative that emerged painted him as potentially treacherous, a perception that cost him his position and sent him into exile. Yet through his writings, he began to control a different narrative, that of the clear-eyed political theorist who dared to speak uncomfortable truths about the nature of power. The control of narrative begins with understanding your audience. Different groups respond to different stories, value different qualities, and interpret the same actions in vastly different ways. The successful person learns to present their achievements and motivations in terms that resonate with each specific audience, while maintaining consistency in their core message. Consider the entrepreneur seeking investment for a revolutionary product. To potential investors, she emphasizes market size, revenue projections, and competitive advantages. To potential employees, she speaks of innovation, growth opportunities, and changing the world. To customers, she focuses on benefits, value, and how the product solves their specific problems. Each narrative is true, but each emphasizes different aspects of the same reality. The weak person either fails to consider how their actions will be interpreted, or assumes that good intentions will somehow be self-evident. They speak and act without considering their audience, then express bewilderment when their words are misunderstood or their motives questioned. They believe that truth should speak for itself, not recognizing that truth without context is often indistinguishable from confusion. Controlling your narrative also requires vigilance against those who would distort it for their own purposes. Competitors may spread rumors that undermine your reputation. Envious colleagues might attribute your success to luck rather than skill. Former allies might rewrite history to cast themselves in a better light at your expense. The strong person monitors these efforts and responds strategically, neither ignoring them entirely nor overreacting to every slight. The fifth law: build networks, not just skills. No man conquers alone. This fifth law acknowledges that individual brilliance, while valuable, pales in comparison to the power of strategic relationships. The history of achievement is not written by hermits and lone wolves, but by those who understood that human connections multiply individual capabilities exponentially. Yet this is not about mere popularity or superficial networking. It concerns the deliberate cultivation of mutually beneficial relationships that create value for all parties involved. The Renaissance city-states exemplified this principle. Florence did not dominate simply because it possessed the most talented individuals, but because it created systems that allowed those talents to connect, collaborate, and amplify each other's abilities. The Medici Bank succeeded not just through financial acumen, but through a network of relationships that spanned continents and connected merchants, artists, scholars, and rulers in a web of mutual interest and benefit. Building powerful networks requires a fundamental shift in perspective, from what others can do for you to what you can do for others. The weak networker approaches relationships with a beggar's mindset, constantly asking for favors, seeking introductions, and generally taking more than they give. This approach creates superficial connections that dissolve the moment they are tested by real need or opportunity. The strong networker begins every relationship by identifying ways to provide value to the other person. They share information that might be useful, make introductions that could benefit both parties, offer their skills or resources to help others achieve their goals. This approach creates relationships based on reciprocity and mutual respect rather than dependency and obligation. The cultivation of networks also requires patience and long-term thinking. Many relationships begin with no immediate benefit to either party, but develop into powerful alliances over time as circumstances change and opportunities arise. The person you mentor today might become the decision-maker who shapes your future tomorrow. The peer you collaborate with on a small project might become the partner who helps you build an empire. Geographic and industry boundaries matter less in network building than genuine human connection and shared values. The strong networker maintains relationships across different fields, understanding that the most valuable opportunities often emerge at the intersection of different industries or perspectives. They stay in touch even when there is no immediate business reason to do so, recognizing that relationships require maintenance during quiet periods to remain strong during critical moments. The sixth law: embrace calculated risks while others cling to false security. Security is the greatest illusion of the weak mind. This sixth law confronts the fundamental truth that in a world of constant change, those who seek safety above all else inevitably find danger, while those who learn to navigate uncertainty discover opportunity. The weak person builds walls and hopes the world will remain static. The strong person develops adaptability and thrives on change. Throughout his diplomatic career, Machiavelli observed that the most successful rulers were not those who avoided risks, but those who took carefully calculated risks while their competitors hesitated. Cesare Borgia conquered territory after territory, not through reckless adventure, but through precise assessment of odds, timing, and potential outcomes. He risked much, but never blindly, and never more than he could afford to lose. The calculation of risk requires honest assessment of both potential gains and potential losses. The weak person focuses only on what might go wrong, paralyzing themselves with fear of failure. The reckless person ignores dangers entirely, courting disaster through willful ignorance. The strong person analyzes both sides of the equation, weighs probabilities, and makes decisions based on expected value rather than emotional comfort. This law applies with particular force in career and financial decisions. The employee who refuses promotions that require relocation or additional responsibility in the name of work-life balance often finds themselves bypassed by more adaptable colleagues. The investor who keeps all their money in savings accounts to avoid market volatility discovers that inflation gradually erodes their purchasing power. The entrepreneur who refuses to pivot when market conditions change watches competitors seize opportunities they were too rigid to pursue. Calculated risk-taking also requires the development of multiple contingencies. The strong person enters uncertain situations with clear exit strategies and fallback positions. They risk boldly but never bet everything on a single outcome. This approach allows them to pursue ambitious goals while maintaining the resilience to survive setbacks and capitalize on unexpected opportunities. The cultivation of risk tolerance is itself a skill that can be developed through practice. Starting with small risks in low-stakes situations allows one to develop judgment and emotional regulation that can be applied to larger decisions later. The person who has never risked failure has never truly tested their capabilities or discovered their potential. The seventh law: study your enemies more than your friends. Your friends will rarely destroy you. They lack both the motivation and the knowledge necessary for effective attack. Your enemies, however, dedicate significant time and energy to understanding your weaknesses, predicting your moves, and identifying opportunities to undermine your position. This seventh law recognizes that those who oppose us often provide more valuable intelligence about our own vulnerabilities than those who support us unconditionally. In the complex political landscape of Renaissance Italy, survival depended on understanding the motivations, capabilities, and likely actions of rival city-states, ambitious nobles, and competing factions within one's own territory. Machiavelli's diplomatic correspondence reveals meticulous attention to the psychology and behavior patterns of Florence's enemies, far more detailed than his analysis of allied relationships. The study of enemies begins with recognizing who they actually are. Many people fail to identify their real opponents, focusing on obvious critics while remaining blind to more subtle threats. The colleague who undermines your projects through passive resistance may pose a greater long-term danger than the one who argues with you openly in meetings. The competitor who copies your strategies while claiming to offer something entirely different may be more dangerous than the one who attacks your approach directly. Understanding enemies requires empathy of a particularly challenging kind, the ability to see the world through their eyes without adopting their values or excusing their actions. What do they want? What do they fear? What do they believe about you, about themselves, about the situation you're both navigating? This analysis reveals not only their likely next moves, but also the assumptions and blind spots that might be exploited. Enemies also serve as involuntary consultants, pointing out weaknesses in your position that friends might be too polite to mention. When someone criticizes your work, challenges your ideas, or questions your methods, they force you to examine and strengthen areas that might otherwise remain vulnerable. The strong person listens carefully to enemy feedback, separating useful intelligence from mere insult. This law does not advocate for paranoia or the assumption that everyone is an enemy. Rather, it calls for clear-eyed assessment of where opposition exists and thoughtful analysis of what that opposition reveals. Some enemies can be converted into allies through understanding and strategic action. Others must simply be outmaneuvered or outlasted, but all provide valuable information for those wise enough to pay attention. The eighth law, master the art of strategic patience time, is the most democratic resource. Every person receives exactly 24 hours each day, yet some accomplish in a year what others fail to achieve in a lifetime. This eighth law addresses the fundamental difference between those who use time as a tool and those who become its victim. Strategic patience is not passive waiting, but active preparation combined with precise timing. Machiavelli learned this lesson through both observation and painful experience. His own impatience to return to political life after his exile led to several unsuccessful attempts to curry favor with the Medici family. Each premature approach not only failed but actually delayed his rehabilitation by reinforcing perceptions of his desperation. Only when he focused on creating lasting value through his writing did opportunities begin to emerge naturally. Strategic patience requires the ability to distinguish between urgent and important. The urgent demands immediate attention but rarely contributes to long-term success. The important builds foundation and capability that compounds over time. The weak person responds constantly to urgency, creating busy work that produces little lasting value. The strong person focuses primarily on importance, understanding that sustained effort on the right activities eventually makes the urgent irrelevant. This principle applies powerfully to career development. The employee who demands immediate promotions and salary increases often finds themselves passed over for opportunities, not because they lack capability, but because they demonstrate poor judgment about timing and process. The employee who focuses on consistently delivering exceptional value while building skills and relationships discovers that advancement comes naturally when the timing is right. In business, strategic patience allows for the development of products and services that truly meet market needs, rather than rushing substandard offerings to market in response to competitive pressure. Companies that invest in research and development while their competitors focus on quarterly earnings often emerge as leaders when market conditions shift. Strategic patience also involves understanding market cycles, industry trends, and human psychology. The real estate investor who accumulates capital during boom periods and deploys it during downturns builds wealth more effectively than those who follow crowd emotions. The job seeker who develops rare skills during economic uncertainty positions themselves perfectly for opportunities that emerge during recovery. The ninth law: create systems that work without you. Personal power has limitations. Systematic power scales infinitely. This ninth law recognizes that true strength lies not in becoming indispensable, but in creating systems that generate value independently of your direct involvement. The weak person hoards responsibilities and knowledge, believing that being needed provides security. The strong person builds processes and trains others, understanding that leverage and scale come through multiplication, not addition. The great Renaissance banking houses understood this principle intuitively. The Medici family did not achieve their influence by personally handling every transaction or maintaining direct relationships with every client. Instead, they created systems of procedures, protocols, and trained personnel that could operate effectively across vast distances and long time periods. Their power grew not from their individual efforts, but from the effectiveness of the systems they built. In modern contexts, this law applies to anyone who wants to move beyond trading time for money. The consultant who documents their methodologies and trains others to implement them can serve more clients simultaneously. The small business owner who creates standard operating procedures and develops competent staff can expand without being physically present at every location. The manager who builds effective processes can be promoted to handle broader responsibilities. Creating systems requires a fundamental shift from doing work to designing work. This involves documenting current processes, identifying inefficiencies, standardizing successful approaches, and training others to maintain quality standards. It also requires the emotional maturity to accept that others may eventually perform certain tasks better than their creator, a reality that strengthens rather than threatens the system builder. The development of systems thinking also applies to personal productivity and goal achievement. Rather than relying on willpower and motivation, which fluctuate unpredictably, the strong person creates routines, environments, and accountability structures that produce desired behaviors consistently. They automate decisions where possible and create external pressures that make success more likely than failure. Systems also provide resilience against disruption. The person whose success depends entirely on their personal effort becomes vulnerable to illness, burnout, or unexpected circumstances. The person who has created robust systems can weather temporary setbacks and even benefit from changes that destroy less adaptable competitors. The 10th law: control your environment or it will control you. Environment shapes behavior more powerfully than conscious intention. This 10th law acknowledges that willpower, while important, is a limited resource that cannot indefinitely overcome negative environmental influences. The weak person attempts to succeed despite their circumstances. The strong person actively shapes their circumstances to support their success. Physical environment affects mental state, emotional regulation, and decision-making ability. The cluttered workspace produces cluttered thinking. The organized, purposeful environment supports focused, productive action. Machiavelli himself understood this principle. His most productive writing occurred not during his busy diplomatic career, but during his rural exile, where the natural rhythms and reduced distractions of farm life allowed deep contemplation and sustained intellectual effort. Social environment may be even more influential than physical surroundings. The people we interact with regularly shape our standards, expectations, and beliefs about what is possible. Those who surround themselves with complainers and excuse makers gradually adopt similar attitudes. Those who associate with ambitious, capable individuals find their own standards and performance rising to match their peer group. The control of environment begins with ruthless honesty about current conditions. What aspects of your physical space support your goals? What elements distract or drain your energy? Who in your social circle challenges you to improve? Who reinforces limiting beliefs or negative patterns? This assessment provides the foundation for strategic environmental modification. Environmental control also extends to information consumption. In an age of infinite content availability, the choice of what to read, watch, and listen to becomes a crucial factor in mental development. The person who fills their mind with celebrity gossip and sensational news develops different thought patterns than the person who consumes biography, history, and technical knowledge relevant to their goals. Creating the right environment often requires short-term sacrifice for long-term benefit. Moving to a city with better career opportunities might mean leaving comfortable social relationships. Choosing to spend time with more accomplished individuals might initially feel uncomfortable or intimidating. Organizing living and working spaces requires time and energy that could be spent on other activities. Yet these investments compound over time, making future success more likely and sustainable. The 11th law. Develop intellectual honesty above all truth is the foundation upon which all lasting success must be built. This 11th law confronts perhaps the most dangerous enemy of human achievement: self-deception. The ability to see reality clearly, acknowledge uncomfortable facts, and make decisions based on accurate information rather than wishful thinking separates those who achieve lasting success from those who experience temporary victories followed by inevitable collapse. Intellectual honesty requires the courage to examine our own motivations, capabilities, and limitations without the protective filter of ego or social expectations. It demands that we distinguish between what we wish were true and what actually is true, between what we hope will happen and what is most likely to happen based on available evidence. Machiavelli exemplified this principle in his political analysis. While his contemporaries wrote about how princes should behave according to Christian virtue or classical ideals, he examined how successful rulers actually behaved in practice. This approach made him controversial, but also made his insights enduringly valuable because they were grounded in observable reality rather than wishful thinking. The practice of intellectual honesty begins with accurate self-assessment. This means honestly evaluating our skills, knowledge, and achievements without either false modesty or inflated ego. It requires acknowledging mistakes and failures as sources of information rather than sources of shame. The weak person either deflates their achievements to appear humble or inflates them to impress others. The strong person reports them accurately because accurate information enables better decision-making. Intellectual honesty also applies to market assessment and competitive analysis. The entrepreneur who honestly evaluates their product's strengths and weaknesses relative to alternatives can make strategic improvements and position their offering appropriately. The one who believes their own marketing copy while ignoring customer feedback sets themselves up for failure when reality inevitably intrudes. In relationships, intellectual honesty means seeing people as they actually are rather than as we wish they were or as they present themselves to be. This doesn't mean becoming cynical or assuming the worst about everyone, but rather making decisions based on observed patterns of behavior rather than stated intentions or hoped-for changes. The development of intellectual honesty requires creating systems and relationships that provide accurate feedback. This might involve seeking mentors who will tell uncomfortable truths, establishing measurement systems that can't be manipulated, or regularly soliciting honest opinions from customers, colleagues, or friends. It also requires the emotional resilience to receive negative information without becoming defensive or dismissive. The 12th law: transform setbacks into stepping stones. Adversity is not the opposite of success. It is the raw material from which success is forged. This final law recognizes that every person will face setbacks, failures, and unexpected challenges. The weak are defeated by these experiences, allowing them to become permanent obstacles. The strong transform them into competitive advantages, using the knowledge, resilience, and clarity that emerge from difficulty to achieve outcomes that would have been impossible without the struggle. Machiavelli's own life perfectly illustrates this principle. His political exile, initially a devastating setback that stripped him of position and influence, became the catalyst for his most important work. The enforced distance from daily political affairs allowed him the perspective and time necessary to analyze the principles of power that he had lived but never fully articulated. His setback became his legacy. The transformation of setbacks requires a fundamental shift in interpretation. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" the strong person asks, "What can I learn from this? And how can I use this experience to become more capable?" This is not positive thinking or denial of difficulty, but strategic analysis focused on extracting maximum value from unavoidable situations. Every failure provides information that success cannot offer. Success tells us what works under specific conditions. Failure reveals what doesn't work and forces us to develop alternatives. The entrepreneur whose first business fails learns lessons about market research, financial management, and team building that no business school could teach. The employee who gets passed over for promotion gains insights into organizational politics and performance requirements that successful colleagues never need to develop. Setbacks also build resilience, the emotional and psychological strength to persist through future challenges. The person who has never failed has never tested their ability to recover. They remain fragile, vulnerable to the first serious difficulty they encounter. The person who has failed and recovered multiple times develops confidence in their ability to handle whatever circumstances might arise. The transformation process also requires patience and long-term perspective. The full value of many setbacks only becomes apparent years later when the skills, knowledge, or relationships developed during difficult periods create opportunities that wouldn't have existed otherwise. The key is to remain open to possibility and continue building capability even when immediate prospects appear dim. Part 2. The destruction of the weak self. The mirror reflects not just what we are, but what we have allowed ourselves to become. In the quiet moments when social masks fall away and external distractions fade, every person confronts the fundamental question that will determine the trajectory of their existence. Will I continue to nurture the comfortable weaknesses that limit my potential? Or will I undertake the difficult work of destroying the parts of myself that prevent greatness? This destruction is not the dramatic collapse that fear makes it seem, but rather the deliberate, systematic dismantling of beliefs, habits, and emotional patterns that no longer serve our highest purposes. It is the recognition that growth requires not just adding new capabilities, but removing old limitations. The sculptor creates beauty not by adding marble, but by removing everything that is not essential to the final form. The weak self whispers seductive lies that make limitations seem like wisdom. It speaks of being realistic when it means giving up on ambitious goals. It promotes work-life balance when it means avoiding the sustained effort required for exceptional achievement. It preaches authenticity when it means clinging to comfortable patterns that prevent growth. These whispers feel safe because they protect us from the possibility of failure, but they also protect us from the possibility of transcendence. The anatomy of weakness, understanding the enemy, requires understanding its true nature. Weakness is not the absence of strength, but the presence of specific patterns that drain energy, cloud judgment, and prevent effective action. These patterns often masquerade as virtues, making them particularly difficult to identify and eliminate. The need for constant approval transforms every interaction into a performance designed to please rather than accomplish. The approval seeker modifies their opinions based on their audience, agrees when they should challenge, and avoids conflict even when conflict would serve their interests. They mistake being liked for being respected, and wonder why their influence remains limited despite their efforts to accommodate everyone. The addiction to comfort manifests as resistance to anything that feels difficult or uncertain. The comfort-addicted person chooses familiar mediocrity over unfamiliar excellence. They remain in jobs that underutilize their abilities because changing careers feels risky. They maintain relationships that drain their energy because being alone feels scary. They avoid learning new skills because the initial incompetence feels uncomfortable. The scarcity mindset treats every resource, money, opportunities, relationships, recognition, as finite and precious. The scarcity-minded person hoards rather than invests, competes rather than collaborates, and fears others' success as a threat to their own potential achievement. They build walls where they should build bridges and create enemies where they could find allies. The victim mentality attributes all setbacks to external forces while claiming no agency over outcomes. The victim explains away their failures through references to unfair treatment, bad timing, or systemic disadvantages. While these factors may genuinely exist, the victim focuses so intensely on them that they fail to identify and act upon the options that remain available. The process of destruction. The elimination of weakness cannot be accomplished through willpower alone. It requires systematic analysis, strategic planning, and sustained effort applied consistently over time. The process resembles physical rehabilitation more than dramatic transformation. Gradual, sometimes uncomfortable, but ultimately liberating. Self-awareness forms the foundation of all meaningful change. This involves honest examination of current patterns without the protective filters of ego or social desirability. What situations consistently trigger emotional reactions that interfere with effective action? What beliefs about yourself or the world limit your willingness to pursue ambitious goals? What habits drain your energy or distract you from important activities? The development of self-awareness requires external feedback because internal perspective is inevitably limited and biased. This might involve seeking honest assessments from trusted friends or mentors, recording and reviewing your behavior in challenging situations, or working with coaches or counselors who can provide objective analysis. The goal is not self-criticism, but accurate information that enables strategic improvement. Once patterns are identified, the work of replacement begins. Weakness cannot simply be removed. It must be replaced with strength. The person seeking to eliminate their need for approval doesn't just stop caring what others think. They develop internal standards and values that provide guidance independent of external validation. The person overcoming comfort addiction doesn't just accept discomfort. They actively seek challenging experiences that build confidence and capability. This replacement process requires practice in low-stakes situations before applying new patterns to high-pressure circumstances. The socially anxious person practices assertiveness in casual conversations before attempting to negotiate salary increases. The conflict-avoidant individual addresses minor disagreements before tackling major relationship issues. This graduated approach builds competence and confidence while minimizing the risk of catastrophic failure during the learning process. The resistance of identity. Perhaps the greatest obstacle to destroying the weak self lies in our attachment to identity. We become invested in our story of who we are, even when that story limits our potential. The person who identifies as not a math person avoids quantitative challenges that could expand their capabilities. The individual who sees themselves as naturally disorganized continues behaviors that undermine their effectiveness, rather than developing systems that support better performance. Identity serves important psychological functions. It provides continuity across time, helps us make sense of our experiences, and connects us to communities of similar individuals. Yet identity can also become a prison when we mistake description for prescription, assuming that how we have been determines how we must always be. The process of identity evolution requires separating core values and principles from specific behaviors and capabilities. Your commitment to honesty, growth, or service to others can remain constant while your methods of expressing these values evolve and improve. You can maintain connection to your history while choosing to develop in directions that might have seemed impossible or uncharacteristic in the past. This evolution often involves grieving the loss of former selves. There is genuine sadness in recognizing that old patterns, relationships, or activities that once provided meaning no longer serve your development. The person becoming more disciplined may lose friendships with those who bonded over shared complaints about their lack of self-control. The individual developing higher standards may need to end romantic relationships with partners who cannot match their growth. The social dimension of transformation, personal transformation, occurs within social contexts that can either support or undermine the process. The people around us have investments in our remaining as we have been. It makes us predictable and maintains established relationship dynamics. Even positive changes can threaten others if those changes highlight their own stagnation or require them to adjust their expectations and behaviors. The strong person anticipates and prepares for social resistance to their development. They communicate changes clearly, set new boundaries where necessary, and accept that some relationships may not survive their growth. This is not callousness but recognition that authentic relationships must be based on who we are becoming, not who we have been. The cultivation of new social connections becomes essential during major personal transformation. This might involve joining organizations aligned with new interests, seeking mentorship from individuals who embody desired qualities, or building professional networks that support career advancement. These new relationships provide models for different ways of being while offering encouragement during difficult periods of change. The process also requires developing skill in managing others' reactions to your transformation. Some people will attempt to pull you back toward familiar patterns through guilt, criticism, or social pressure. Others will test whether your changes are genuine or temporary. The strong person remains focused on their own development while refusing to be drawn back into patterns that no longer serve their growth. The paradox of strength through vulnerability. True strength often requires passing through vulnerability rather than avoiding it. The destruction of weak patterns typically involves a period of uncertainty and discomfort as old supports are removed before new capabilities are fully developed. This transition period tests resolve and often determines whether transformation will be successful or whether the person will retreat to familiar limitations. The business owner eliminating their dependency on a single major client must accept a period of reduced income while building a more diversified customer base. The employee developing leadership capabilities must risk making mistakes in new responsibilities before becoming competent in their expanded role. The individual improving their physical fitness must endure initial discomfort and apparent weakness before experiencing the benefits of better health and capability. This vulnerable period requires faith in the process and confidence in eventual outcomes, even when immediate results are not visible. It also requires support systems, whether friends, family, mentors, or professional services that can provide encouragement and guidance during difficult transitions. The paradox resolves when the temporary vulnerability leads to permanent strength. The person who has successfully navigated major transformation develops confidence in their ability to handle uncertainty and change. They become anti-fragile, growing stronger rather than weaker when faced with challenges that would overwhelm those who have never tested their resilience. The compound effect of destroyed limitations. Each weakness eliminated creates space for strength to develop, and each strength developed makes the elimination of additional weaknesses easier. This compound effect means that the most difficult part of transformation is often the beginning, when old patterns are strongest and new capabilities are weakest. The person who overcomes their fear of public speaking often finds that their general confidence increases, making it easier to address other fears and limitations. The individual who develops discipline in one area, perhaps physical fitness or financial management, discovers that this discipline transfers to other areas of their life. The person who learns to think strategically about their career often begins applying strategic thinking to their relationships, health, and personal development. This compounding effect suggests that the choice of which weaknesses to address first matters significantly. Starting with patterns that affect multiple areas of life creates momentum that makes subsequent changes easier. The person who improves their emotional regulation becomes more effective in their career, relationships, and personal pursuits. The individual who develops systems thinking can apply this capability to any challenge they encounter. The compound effect also means that transformation, once begun seriously, tends to accelerate over time. The initial changes create better circumstances, which make further improvements more possible and attractive. Success breeds success. Confidence enables risk-taking, and capability creates opportunities for even greater capability development. Part 3. The architecture of invincible strength. In the ancient world, architects understood that the most enduring structures were not those built with the strongest materials, but those designed according to principles that distributed stress, channeled forces constructively, and remained stable through changing conditions. The construction of invincible personal strength follows similar principles. It is not built through single moments of heroic effort, but through the systematic application of proven architectural principles to the design of one's life. The truly strong individual resembles a Gothic cathedral more than a fortress wall. The cathedral achieves its stability not through massive thickness but through the elegant distribution of weight and pressure across flying buttresses and supporting structures. External forces that would topple simpler buildings are channeled and absorbed, becoming part of the structure's strength rather than sources of vulnerability. This architectural metaphor reveals the fundamental error in most approaches to personal development. The weak person attempts to build strength by accumulating more knowledge, more connections, more resources, without consideration for how these elements work together. The result resembles a building where rooms are added without regard for structural integrity. It may appear impressive for a time, but internal contradictions and poor integration ensure eventual collapse. The strong person designs their life according to principles that ensure all elements support and reinforce each other. Their habits align with their values, their relationships support their goals, their skills complement each other, and their resources are deployed strategically rather than scattered across competing priorities. This integration creates a strength that is greater than the sum of its parts, the foundation, unshakable core principles. Every enduring structure requires a foundation that goes deeper than surface appearances and remains stable when external conditions change. For human beings, this foundation consists of core principles, fundamental beliefs about what matters most and how life should be lived. These principles serve as decision-making criteria when circumstances become complex or pressured, and as sources of motivation when temporary setbacks occur. The identification and articulation of core principles requires deep self-examination and honest assessment of what you actually value, rather than what you think you should value. Many people adopt principles second-hand from family, culture, or social expectations without ever examining whether these borrowed beliefs genuinely resonate with their own experience and aspirations. True core principles pass 3 tests. They remain constant across different situations, they provide clear guidance for difficult decisions, and they generate energy and motivation rather than drain them. The principle that sounds admirable in abstract conversation but feels burdensome in daily application is not a genuine core principle. It is a borrowed belief that has not been truly internalized. The person whose core principle is growth approaches every situation by asking what can be learned and how capabilities can be developed. Career setbacks become opportunities to acquire new skills. Relationship difficulties become chances to improve communication abilities, and unexpected changes become occasions for developing adaptability. This consistent focus on growth creates a life trajectory that trends upward regardless of temporary circumstances. The individual whose core principle is value creation evaluates decisions based on their potential to solve problems or improve conditions for themselves and others. They choose career paths that allow them to make meaningful contributions, structure their time around activities that produce lasting value, and build relationships that benefit all parties involved. This focus ensures that their efforts compound over time rather than merely consuming energy. Core principles also provide resilience during difficult periods by connecting temporary actions to permanent purposes. The entrepreneur enduring the struggles of building a business remains motivated by their principle of creating value for customers. The student persisting through challenging coursework maintains energy through their commitment to intellectual development. The athlete training through discomfort draws strength from their dedication to excellence. The load-bearing walls. Essential capabilities. Once principles provide foundation, specific capabilities serve as the load-bearing walls that give structure practical form. These are not random skills but carefully chosen capabilities that support multiple areas of life and create options rather than limitations. The strong person identifies and develops these essential capabilities deliberately, understanding that versatility combined with depth creates more opportunities than narrow specialization. Communication stands as perhaps the most important load-bearing capability because it affects every human interaction and determines how effectively you can influence outcomes. This includes not just speaking and writing clearly, but also listening actively, reading nonverbal cues accurately, and adapting your communication style to different audiences and situations. The person who masters communication can build relationships, negotiate favorable outcomes, teach and learn effectively, and inspire others to action. The development of communication capability requires practice across different contexts and feedback from others about your effectiveness. It involves studying how master communicators structure their messages, adapt their approach to different audiences, and handle difficult conversations or challenging questions. It also requires developing emotional regulation so that stress or conflict does not degrade your communication effectiveness when it matters most. Analytical thinking serves as another essential load-bearing capability, enabling you to break complex problems into manageable components, identify patterns that others miss, and make decisions based on evidence rather than emotion or impulse. This capability proves valuable whether you are evaluating investment opportunities, diagnosing relationship problems, or planning career moves. The cultivation of analytical thinking involves learning systematic approaches to problem solving, studying logic and statistics to improve reasoning accuracy, and practicing the discipline of gathering information before reaching conclusions. It also requires developing intellectual humility, the recognition that first impressions may be wrong and that changing your mind when presented with new evidence is a sign of strength rather than weakness. Emotional intelligence, the ability to understand, manage, and effectively utilize emotions both in yourself and others, forms the third essential load-bearing capability. This skill affects every aspect of life, from career advancement to relationship satisfaction to personal happiness and resilience. Emotional intelligence development begins with increasing self-awareness of your own emotional patterns and triggers. This involves learning to recognize emotions as they arise, understanding what situations tend to produce specific emotional reactions, and developing strategies for managing these reactions constructively. It extends to reading others' emotional states accurately and responding in ways that build rather than damage relationships. The support systems, relationships and resources, no structure, however well designed, can stand without appropriate support systems. In human terms, these consist of relationships with other people and access to resources that enable sustained high performance. The strong person builds and maintains these support systems proactively, understanding that they are not signs of dependency, but essential elements of any significant achievement. Mentorship relationships provide access to wisdom and experience that would take decades to acquire independently. The effective mentee approaches these relationships with clear objectives, specific questions, and genuine appreciation for the mentor's time and expertise. They also understand that mentorship is not one way. They look for opportunities to provide value to their mentors through their energy, perspectives, or connections. The cultivation of mentorship requires identifying individuals whose careers, skills, or wisdom you admire and finding appropriate ways to connect with them. This might involve reaching out directly, participating in organizations where such people are active, or asking mutual connections for introductions. The key is approaching with genuine interest in learning and clear respect for their time and accomplishments. Peer relationships with individuals pursuing similar paths provide mutual support, accountability, and opportunity for collaboration. These relationships work best when based on reciprocity. Each person brings value to the others through their knowledge, connections, or capabilities. They also require honest communication and the willingness to both give and receive constructive feedback. Professional networks extend beyond personal relationships to include the broader community of individuals in your field or related areas. These networks provide access to opportunities, information about industry trends, and connections that can facilitate career advancement or business development. Building professional networks requires consistent participation in relevant events, organizations, and online communities, combined with genuine effort to help others achieve their objectives. Resource systems include the financial, technological, and informational tools that enable high performance. The strong person invests in quality tools, maintains financial reserves that provide flexibility during transitions or opportunities, and develops systems for accessing and organizing information efficiently. Financial resources require careful planning and disciplined management. This involves not just earning adequate income, but also controlling expenses, saving consistently, and investing wisely to create wealth that compounds over time. It also means understanding how to use credit and debt strategically to accelerate progress toward important goals. The reinforcing elements, habits and routines. The daily habits and routines that fill the spaces between major decisions and significant events often determine long-term outcomes more than dramatic moments of choice. These seemingly minor elements serve as reinforcing supports that either strengthen or weaken the overall structure over time. The strong person designs and implements habits that support their principles and goals automatically, reducing the need for constant decision-making and willpower. Morning routines establish the tone and energy level for entire days. The person who begins each day with activities that promote clarity, energy, and focus, perhaps through exercise, meditation, reading, or planning, creates momentum that carries through subsequent activities. The person who begins reactively, immediately checking messages and responding to others' priorities, starts from a position of weakness that often persists throughout the day. The design of effective morning routines requires experimentation to determine what activities produce the best mental and physical state for your particular circumstances and objectives. It also requires the discipline to maintain these routines even when motivation is low or schedule pressure increases. because consistency creates the compound benefits that make the routine worthwhile. Work habits determine productivity and advancement more than talent or intelligence alone. This includes the ability to prioritize important activities over urgent but less significant tasks, to maintain focus for extended periods despite distractions, and to organize work processes that minimize wasted effort and maximize output quality. The development of effective work habits involves studying productivity methodologies, experimenting with different approaches to time management and task organization, and honestly assessing which activities produce the most valuable results. It also requires creating work environments that support sustained high performance and eliminating or minimizing activities that drain energy without producing proportional value. Learning habits ensure continued growth and adaptation as circumstances and opportunities change. The strong person maintains systematic approaches to acquiring new knowledge and skills, whether through formal education, reading, practical experimentation, or learning from mentors and peers. Effective learning habits include regular reading in areas relevant to your goals, seeking feedback on your performance from knowledgeable others, and deliberately practicing skills until they become automatic. They also involve documenting insights and lessons learned so that experience translates into wisdom rather than simply accumulating undifferentiated time. The dynamic balance, adaptation, and growth. Unlike static structures, human strength must incorporate the ability to change and grow in response to new circumstances and opportunities. This requires building adaptation and learning capabilities into the basic architecture rather than treating change as an external threat to be resisted. The truly strong person becomes anti-fragile, growing stronger rather than weaker when faced with stress and uncertainty. This dynamic capability begins with maintaining multiple options rather than becoming completely dependent on any single path to success. The professional who develops skills that are valuable in multiple industries can navigate economic changes more effectively than the specialist whose expertise becomes obsolete. The person who maintains diverse income streams has more financial resilience than the individual dependent on a single employer. The cultivation of optionality requires conscious effort to avoid overcommitment to specific paths or outcomes. This doesn't mean avoiding focus or dedication, but rather maintaining awareness of alternatives and developing capabilities that create flexibility when circumstances change. The strong person also builds systematic approaches to recognizing when change is necessary and implementing transitions effectively. This involves developing sensitivity to early warning signs that current strategies are becoming less effective, maintaining awareness of emerging opportunities in your field or industry, and creating decision-making processes that can evaluate new possibilities objectively. Change management requires both strategic thinking about long-term direction and tactical execution of specific transitions. The person changing careers must plan financially for potential income disruption, while also developing new skills and building relationships in their target field. The entrepreneur pivoting their business model must maintain cash flow during the transition, while also testing and refining their new approach. The integration, living as a complete system. The ultimate measure of strength architecture is not the quality of individual components, but their integration into a coherent whole that functions effectively across all areas of life. The truly strong person does not compartmentalize their existence into separate professional, personal, and recreational spheres, but creates alignment that allows each area to support and reinforce the others. This integration begins with ensuring that career choices align with personal values and support rather than undermine relationship and health goals. The person who chooses work that conflicts with their core principles or requires sacrificing their physical and mental well-being may achieve short-term success but inevitably faces longer-term problems, as internal contradictions create stress and instability. The integration of different life areas also involves managing time and energy as unified resources, rather than treating them as separate concerns. The strong person understands that exceptional performance in any area requires energy that comes from physical health, emotional well-being, and clear purpose. They design their lives to optimize total effectiveness rather than maximizing any single metric. This systems approach extends to goal setting and decision-making. Rather than pursuing multiple independent objectives that compete for time and attention, the strong person identifies goals that support each other and create positive feedback loops. The person whose career advancement depends on public speaking ability might choose social activities that provide practice opportunities. The individual building a business might select physical fitness activities that also serve networking purposes. The ultimate expression of integrated strength is the ability to maintain high performance across multiple areas simultaneously while continuing to grow and adapt over time. This represents not just personal success but the development of capabilities that can benefit others and contribute to meaningful purposes beyond individual achievement. The person who has built this level of integrated strength becomes truly invincible not because they cannot be harmed or defeated in any particular situation, but because they have developed the capability to recover from any setback, adapt to any change, and continue growing regardless of external circumstances. They have destroyed their weak self not through violence but through patient construction of something better. They have built strength not just for its own sake, but as a foundation for service, contribution, and meaning that extends far beyond their individual existence. In the end, the 12 laws of Machiavelli serve not as ends in themselves, but as tools for building lives of exceptional capability and contribution. They transform individuals from victims of circumstance into architects of destiny, from consumers of value into creators of value, from followers of others' visions into leaders of their own. This transformation represents perhaps the highest achievement possible for any human being. The full realization of their potential in service of purposes worthy of that potential. The strong person understands that invincible strength is not about becoming untouchable or independent of others, but about developing such reliable capability and clear purpose that they become valuable allies, trusted leaders, and sources of stability for those around them. Their strength serves not just their own success, but the success of everyone whose lives they touch. In this way, the destruction of the weak self becomes not just personal transformation, but contribution to the strength and well-being of the broader human community.